As a regular beta, I've got an S-tier alpha husband who's 6 years younger than me, 2 years into our marriage. And I still like him, though he still hates me. At 6 p.m., I'm sitting at the dinner table, eating my usual meal. My husband comes down the stairs one-handed, cradling a motorcycle helmet. His footsteps hit hard, thud thud thud, heavy and urgent, like he can't stand being in the same room with me for another second. Just wants to bolt. He reaches the door when I call out to him. Mason turns back, wearing the black jacket and work pants I picked out. His ink black hair sticks up in wild spikes. His eyes narrow. I've got plans with friends to drink. Don't bother me if you're not busy. I say. Drinking on an empty stomach's bad for you. Come eat something first. My plate's already set with his chopsticks. Mason walks over but doesn't sit. He grabs a couple of bites, shoves the chopsticks down, and heads out. I tap the table hard, then push the bowl of warm lotus root and spare rib soup toward him. Drink it. Mason frowns, voice ice cold. I'm not drinking it. He turns and walks away without another word. My hand freezes mid-motion. I pull the bowl back. Mason's already at the door when he stops. Glances over his shoulder. I must have looked off. He lets out a sharp TCH, then strides back, snatches the soup bowl from my hand, and drains it in one go. Okay, done. Mason slams the empty bowl down, his face tight with irritation. He doesn't get why I'm always cooking up some health tonic or another, then pushing it at him like a chore. I don't explain. Just nod. Soft reply, Then, quiet but firm, don't drive after drinking. If you're not back by 2, I'll come get you. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed, sharp and angry. Give it up, nothing you do will change a thing. He's not gonna fall for you. No matter what. Golden text scrolled past my eyes like a relentless stream. Ever since the wedding 2 years ago, they'd been popping up in front of me, uninvited, unrelenting. They claimed Mason was the main male lead, the world's chosen protagonist, who had no feelings at first and only learned love after meeting his destined counterpart. And that the original bride, me, a D-tier omega, would go insane from rejection, hurt the true love interest, and end up locked away in a psychiatric ward, tortured by Mason himself. Originally, it was supposed to be my younger brother, the one who'd been arranged as his partner. But on the day of the engagement, he vanished without a trace. I stepped in last minute and married Mason instead. The messages said my brother fled because he knew the script too well. I took off my glasses, rubbed my temples, ignored the streamer comments like always, grabbed my coat, and drove to the bar to pick up someone. Mason was in his private booth, the door cracked open just enough for muffled voices to drift out. Mason, stay all night, let me bring a few more young omegas over. Nah, he can't. His old man won't let him spend the night outside. Hey, holding on so tight, you must not feel secure, after all. Mason's a top-tier alpha, while he's just a beta. Heard he's even an older man too. 6 years senior to Mason. Right? Let's not talk about him. Mason lounged with one leg crossed over the other, stretched back on the sofa, and kicked the guy playfully. He wrinkled his nose in annoyance. Ugh, it's so annoying, always checking up on everything. Just bear with it for now, everyone knows he's just a temporary solution. Do you really think your family would let you stay with a beta forever? Why should I put up with him? He controls what I eat, when I sleep, even what clothes I wear. I've had enough. Then just ignore him. Humph. Grandpa says it's about owing a debt. I'm not listening. What if he goes and tells Grandpa behind my back? Seriously, Mason. I've seen how well he looks after you. Why not just give it a real try? Maybe feelings will grow over time. It's only for a few years anyway. Who'd want to feel anything for him? I hate it when people tell me what to do. Mason glanced at his phone irritably. It was 1:30 in the morning. And he stood up. I'm leaving. You heard him. He's only staying because of your grandfather's promise to repay a favor. He really can't stand being around you. He's had enough of you. He'll never develop feelings for you. After watching Mason leave the private room, I finally stepped out from around the corner. Even though I already knew Mason didn't like me, hearing him say it out loud made me feel as if I'd suddenly been thrown into an icy cave. My blood ran cold all over, and a sharp pain surged through my chest. What's the point of pushing any further? I told myself. He's never liked you. And he never will. Holding on too tightly only makes him dislike you more. You need to come to your senses. The next morning, Mason woke up and didn't see the outfit I'd laid out for him by the bed. He came downstairs, only to find no breakfast waiting on the table, nothing like the usual spot I always left for him. He pulled out his phone. Not a single message from me since yesterday. A strange unease settled in his chest, and he ran his fingers through his hair. Restless. Automatically, he scanned the room for me. He'd already been puzzled waking up without me there. Now, no breakfast meant I hadn't even joined him for a meal. Thinking back, I hadn't gone to bed in our master bedroom last night either. A quiet frustration prickled at him, the kind that came out of nowhere, and his thick black brows knitted together tightly. When I walked back in, Mason was still seated at the table, caught in some silent waiting. I paused, startled for a second. I'd timed my return just to miss his wake-up, figured he'd have eaten and left already. But here he was, not gone, sitting there like he'd been expecting someone all along. I glanced at the clean table surface and asked, "You haven't eaten yet? I was waiting for you." Mason crossed his arms, voice tight with annoyance. "Where the hell did you go this morning?" I didn't answer him. Just said, "Breakfast's in the warmer, Sophia made it. Grab it and eat." "What do you mean?" Mason snapped, his voice rising. I walked past him and went into the kitchen, reaching only for my own breakfast. Mason stood at the doorway with a glum expression as I spoke. "You can eat on your own when I'm not around from now on." Mason was taken aback. At first, it was me who insisted he join me for breakfast. He always thought I had some strange attachment to sharing meals. No matter how early or late he woke up, I'd always have breakfast ready and waiting. After 2 years, he'd quietly grown used to it. Now that I told him he didn't have to eat with me anymore, strangely, he didn't feel free. He felt a strange emptiness inside. Mason was originally meant to be paired with my Omega younger brother, who was quite timid. His boldest act was running away from his own wedding. Looking back now, everything between us was something I pushed for without considering what he truly wanted. I just assumed Mason would eventually come around, but never stopped to think that all I gave him was exactly what he didn't want. 2 days after I actually stopped trying to control him, Mason started going out every night for drinks. Sometimes he'd crawl in before 2. Other times he'd just vanish the whole damn night. I didn't say a word. The tension in the villa grew heavier with each passing day. But the chat was buzzing, everyone was thrilled. Yes, finally. The main couple met. This hero saves the damsel moment, pure gold. You know why the lead guy hasn't come home these past few nights? Ever heard of love at first sight? I clenched the edge of my book hard, my nails biting into the page. I knew Mason had pulled a waiter out of trouble at the bar a couple of days ago, someone getting harassed by a guest, and the chat was already calling him that guy's soulmate. Said he was an S-tier Omega with a 100% compatibility match to Mason's pheromones, meant to be, destined from the start. For the first time, I cowered away, too afraid to face the truth. A few nights later, his friend called me out of the blue, saying Mason was drunk and shouting for home, asking if I'd come pick him up. When I got to the bar, Mason lay sprawled on the couch, eyes shut tight, muttering nonsense under his breath. Half rolled into a huge lump of tangled limbs, looked oddly lonely like that. I reached out and grabbed his hand. He snapped open his eyes, saw it was me, then immediately shut them again. I hauled him up. He resisted for a second before going limp against my shoulder, fingers fiddling with my hair like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Back home, I settled him on the couch and soaked a towel in hot water to wipe his face. He sat still as I worked, quiet, then suddenly whispered, "No soup today?" My hands froze. I looked down. Mason reached out and caught my wrist. Gave it a little shake. "Don't be mad. Please." He leaned in like he was going to kiss me. I shoved him hard. "No way." He stared at me, stunned, eyes wide with betrayal. "Why not? You're supposed to be my wife, the wife asterisk, not this." Mason had never called me that. The only person he'd ever call wife was the one he wanted to kiss. Was it her, that faded soul from the chat? The one they said matched him 100% in pheromone code? I said firmly, "No. Love." He lowered his head with a quiet sigh, leaning in slightly as he murmured, "Don't push me away." A chill spread through my chest. Mason would never say things like that to me. The person who could make him say such things. I looked up at the chat and said, "I want to meet the one destined to be Mason's partner." The next afternoon, I sat in a cafe, staring across the street at the bakery. The stream of comments said the protagonist was an orphan, working days at the bakery to pay for tuition and nights serving drinks at a bar. I watched the young man walking guests out, innocent looking, soft-spoken, Gentle in a way that made you want to wrap him in protection just by looking. The complete opposite of me. Main character's boyfriend's here. Good. Good. Apologizing on day 2, you deserve a wife. The young man blinked in surprise. Then broke into a wide grin, waving frantically towards someone far off before dashing a few steps in that direction. My eyes followed involuntarily. Mason nodded at the approaching youth, who said something I couldn't hear. And for just a second, the corner of Mason's mouth lifted into a faint smile. Looked far more relaxed than when he was with me. The two walked side by side into the bakery, through the glass. I could just make out the young man directing Mason like a boss, telling him to grab flour here. Need dough there. Mason went along with it patiently. No complaints. A moment later, the youth said something. Mason pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons. My own phone buzzed almost instantly with a message from Mason. A friend's coming to stay for a bit. I need you to have the guest room tidied up. I stood, paid my bill, and walked out of the cafe. There was no point in watching any further. When Mason got back, I was already giving orders to the staff as they carried things. My pillows, blankets, clothes, paintings, all carefully removed from the master bedroom one by one. What the hell is going on? Mason stood at the top of the stairs, his face dark with irritation as he stared at me and the moving crew. I turned to him. Calm, you've always said you didn't want to share a room with me, so why not use this chance to move my things? From now on, I'll be in the East Wing guest bedroom. I won't bother you anymore. Mason froze, eyes locked on me, stunned. A beat passed, then he kicked the stairs hard and snapped. Fine. Go ahead and move out. Don't come crawling back later. I didn't look at him. Instead, my gaze landed on the young man behind him, flustered and shifting awkwardly. You must be Mason's friend, I said, calm as ever. Your room's ready, 2nd floor. West Wing. Need me to show you? Ah, no, thanks. The guy flinched like he'd been startled, edging closer to Mason. Mason can take me. Then, softer, me and Mason, we're more than friends. I went quiet. The young man quietly tugged on Mason's sleeve. Mason gave me one flat look, then turned and walked up the stairs, the guy trailing close behind. As they passed, I clenched my fingers together, but still couldn't stop myself. You really need to bring him here? Wasn't the outside house enough? What kind of arrangement is a business alliance in our circle? You really just found out today? Mason looked at me. So, aren't you the one who said you weren't going to be involved with me anymore? I shut my mouth tightly, forcing back tears, then stepped aside to let them pass. Look at that, just a few days after meeting, the main character has already brought his partner home to live. Good move, you finally figured out you should clear out of the room. Now that your beloved is settled in. I'm warning you, don't even think about causing trouble. If you treat him well now, maybe when the main character decides to lock you away later, your beloved might speak up on your behalf. I couldn't help but let out a quiet scoff. It's probably hard for anyone to watch their lover walk step by step toward what was meant to be, or to move forward without hope from the very beginning, yet still give it everything. I pulled out my phone, opened the contact labeled divorce lawyer, and sent a message. I need to draft a divorce agreement. During dinner, the young man sat between me and Mason. I kept a calm expression, even smiling and chatting with him briefly, probably not giving Mason the reaction he was hoping for. Halfway through, he angrily set down his chopsticks. The young man flinched, then quickly stood up and hurried after him out of the dining room. The old butler sighed as he watched everything unfold, then handed me a small medicine bottle. I've noticed you haven't been getting much rest lately. This is a newly developed sleep aid, more effective than before. If you can't fall asleep, just take one tablet. Thank you, I said, covering my face with my hand and letting out a quiet sigh before accepting the bottle. The new sleep aid worked remarkably well, but at midnight, I was still woken by the sound of the door opening. I forced my eyes open with effort. Mason, what are you doing here? Mason said confidently. I must have taken the wrong room. I was momentarily stunned. It was me who moved out, not you. How could you? I suddenly paused. He wasn't heading to the master bedroom. Then where else could he be going, on the entire 2nd floor? Aside from himself, only my younger brother and I were there. The answer was clear without saying. My heart turned icy cold. Leave. Mason didn't catch what I said and leaned closer. What? Get out, I said coldly. Mason's pupils narrowed sharply, his eyes blazing with icy fury as he snapped. Let me teach you. When you don't know how to speak, maybe it's best just to stay quiet. I've endured the most from you all my life. Now you don't want me anymore? Fine. I never liked you anyway. Tears poured out uncontrollably. I couldn't tell if my body hurt more or my heart did. All I could do was bury my face into the pillow, letting the sorrow soak in. After that day, Mason and I quietly fell into a cold war. He brought the young man everywhere, unashamedly attending every public gathering, flaunting his new relationship like it was some kind of victory, completely discarding me, even openly letting him take over my old spot in the house, the dining room, the study, and even the master bedroom. The chat feed erupted in celebration, counting down my inevitable downfall as the main couple's romance took another step forward. The moment Mason openly served the young man at dinner while I remained expressionless. My phone rang. "Hello, is this Mr. Owen? Your brother Anthony has been in a car accident and is now in hospital. Would you be able to come over?" I stood up abruptly, ignoring the sharp screech of the chair sliding across the floor behind me. My face filled with urgency as I rushed toward the door. Mason rose too, his voice low and steady. "What are you doing out at this hour?" He quickly stepped in front of me, gripping my arm. "Why are you so flustered? Who could possibly be worth this kind of worry? This doesn't concern you. Move aside." I yanked my arm free and stepped out without hesitation. When I arrived at the hospital, Anthony had already finished surgery, sitting quietly in bed with a bandage on his head and a cast on his leg. The patient has a fractured leg bone and mild concussion. He'll need to stay hospitalized for some time. As I was speaking with the nurse, I opened the ward door. Anthony looked up, his lips trembling as he called out softly, "Brother." I glanced at him briefly, then walked over and sat down beside the bed. "Brother," Anthony stammered again, then lowered his head and whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into that marriage. I was so afraid. I saw. If I had stayed there, I'd have already been gone by now. Brother, you've always been stronger than me, so I thought, if it were you, you wouldn't end up like that." He spoke in a scattered, hurried way. After finishing, he looked at me carefully, with a hint of hesitation. "Can you keep my presence here a secret from Mom and Dad? I'm afraid they'll make me switch back again." I crossed my arms and said, "You can rest easy. A family isn't something you can trade in and out of. But you're a beta. After all, the Ho family wouldn't allow the young heir to stay with a beta forever." I was slightly surprised he'd say that, and hesitated before replying. "You've changed a lot over these past 2 years. You still think he's some innocent little brother? In the story, he was the villain. He could never be that simple. He thought you were living a good life and wanted to switch back with you." I paused for a moment, then asked straight out, "Do you still want to leave? Brother, I really miss the soup you used to make. Could you bring me meals for the next couple of days?" Anthony changed the subject. Just then, my divorce lawyer sent over the revised agreement. "Mr. Owen, I've sent you the updated divorce papers." I set down my phone, stared at him for a moment, and nodded, saying, "All right, fine. Mason and I are both getting divorced anyway. What he wants to do is his own business with Mason." After dealing with the accident, it was already dark outside. I was exhausted and didn't want to go back and face Mason with that young man, so I just checked into a hotel. The next day, as soon as I got home, I saw Mason standing stiffly at the doorway, his expression dark and stormy. I walked straight past him toward the kitchen. The fridge was well stocked, so after glancing inside for a moment, I prepared a vegetable and pork bone soup for Anthony. Mason followed me closely ever since I came in, his tall frame casting an intense presence. Someone with less courage might have felt overwhelmed just by being near him. I couldn't help but snap at him, "Don't stand there blocking the way." Mason's expression eased slightly, and he took a small step back, but still stayed right behind me without moving. I reached into the cabinet and took out a thermos, carefully placing the soup and Auntie's home-cooked meal inside. Mason reached for the lunchbox from my hand, but I pulled back slightly, avoiding his grasp. For a moment, Mason stood frozen in place. "You didn't like soup before. This isn't for you." I paused, then added, "If you don't want it, I won't serve it to you again." Mason opened his mouth as if to say something, but finally said nothing. "Mason," a young voice called from upstairs. "I have a problem I can't figure out. Could you help me check it?" My heart clenched tight, my fingers pressing the lunchbox so hard they turned pale. Mason looked at me. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Go ahead. I'll talk to you tomorrow." The next morning, Owen and Mason sat facing each other in the study. After a moment of silence, "Why did you stop caring about me? Let's get a divorce." Owen and Mason spoke at the same time. What did you say? Mason reacted first. I took a deep breath. I said, let's get a divorce. No, that's not how it works. Mason stood up sharply, his voice rising. I won't allow it. No way, I can't agree to this. I slid the prepared divorce papers toward him and whispered, you know, relationships between A and B aren't recognized by courts. Once one party files for ending the agreement, it takes effect in a month regardless of the other's consent. This was originally meant to help alphas, those who married betas on impulse but later found their true omega match, so they could move on from complicated past relationships. Besides, why are you refusing this? Don't you dislike me a lot? Mason clenched his teeth and stared at me as if he wanted to burn a hole through me. You really want a divorce, don't you? Yes. I looked down. Whether or not you sign is just a matter of time. If both parties sign the divorce agreement, the marriage ends immediately. If not, it'll only be delayed by another month. Mason grabbed the paper and tore it into pieces before slamming the door shut with a loud bang. I didn't say anything. I submitted the prepared divorce application to the Marriage Oversight Board. More than half a month later, Mason sat in a private bar booth, looking troubled, drinking heavily. This had been going on for over 10 days now. What are you doing again? You're an elite alpha. He's just a beta. Didn't you already know the two of you wouldn't last? Yeah, Mason. Haven't you always wanted to split up? It's actually great he brought it up first. No need to worry about what your father will say now. Honestly, it'd be better this way. You'll eventually meet someone more suitable. Wait, don't you already have someone right here? Should we call him over? The booth door swung open again. Guys, guess who I just saw outside? Owen, pushing a young man in a wheelchair. They looked pretty close. Mason suddenly stood up. I was just following Anthony's request, pushing his wheelchair into the hotel where he'd been hiding. About to press the elevator button, a large hand suddenly grabbed my shoulder. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Don't you have anything to explain? Mason's other hand wrapped around my waist, drawing close and lowering his voice as he asked. I smiled. Explain what? Didn't you yourself say that business marriages in our circle are all like this? The hand on my shoulder tightened suddenly. Come back with me. No way, I said, lowering my head and reaching to loosen Mason's fingers gripping my waist. Since you found someone you like, I won't go back and trouble your eyes. Mason ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. It's not like that between us. Brother, this must be Mason. Anthony tugged at me. Speaking up. Don't misunderstand. Mason brother, I'm really my brother's younger sibling. Anthony suddenly spoke, and both Mason and I turned to look at him. Seeing Anthony's innocent expression, I slowly tightened my grip. That explained why he'd insisted on coming all the way here, just a short distance from the bar Mason often visited, to pack up his things. Since Anthony had made up his mind to return to his path, I shifted slightly sideways and said flatly, This is Anthony, your original betrothed. Anthony gently called out, Mason brother. Mason still stared at me, gripping my wrist and pulling me forward. Go home. He pulled too hard, the skin on my wrist turned red quickly. I took a deep breath and slapped him across the face, saying sharply, Are you finally awake? Anthony behind me and Mason's friends who had just arrived were all stunned. Stand still. I pulled my arm back, crossing it over my chest with a cold stare. Don't tell me you don't understand what I'm saying? Mason stood before me, head slightly lowered, eyes faintly red. I turned to his group of friends and spoke coldly. Take him back. His friends hesitated, then stepped forward slowly and gently tugged at him. Mason remained rooted in place. I shot him a warning look. Mason pressed his lips together, and slowly, his friends led him away down the hallway. I walked back to Anthony's side. He immediately tensed up and straightened his posture obediently. Only the live chat kept scrolling endlessly. I stared at the words sensitive period on the stream, my heart aching as if it had been torn straight from my chest. I blankly fixed my gaze on my silent phone, feeling the last hope slowly fade away. Yeah, he has someone better to be with now. He doesn't need me anymore. An alpha's sensitive period lasts 7 days. On the 6th day, a message arrived on my phone. Could you come to her family? Mason is in danger. I immediately drove toward her family, my mind filled with worry about what might be wrong with Mason. At that moment, the chat went completely silent, no questions, no comments at all. When I arrived at her family, I saw from afar that his childhood friends were gathered outside the gate, anxiously waiting. I got out of the car and was immediately greeted by them. "You're finally here, come on. Come on. Let's talk as we go." Mason has entered his sensitive period. He managed to hold on for a few days at first. But now he can't anymore. He won't let anyone near him. But he's been calling out your name nonstop. "We thought you might be able to help. He's right inside. Think carefully before deciding whether to go in." I was led all the way to a heavy steel door. As I stood there, suddenly a loud bang came from inside. The sound shook the whole house. The others looked at me with visible unease and worry. To my own surprise, I stayed calm. I simply nodded and said, "Open it." As the door cracked open slightly, a hand shot out instantly and pulled me inside. The heavy steel door slammed shut again, cutting off all the shouts and warnings from outside. The room was dimly lit, with only a single yellowish wall lamp on. Mason was kneeling on the floor, his fringe soaked from sweat and clinging to his forehead. His black vest tight against his body as his chest rose and fell rapidly. His head rested heavily against my shoulder, his voice hoarse and barely recognizable. "You've finally come." For the next few hours, he stayed in my arms as I gently stroked his back, gradually calming the intense emotional surge until he fell deeply asleep in my embrace. Just before dawn, the steel door opened once more. Mason had regained his composure, his hair disheveled and redness at the corners of his eyes. Yet he stubbornly stayed by the doorway without stepping out. Friends rushed over to ask questions, but he didn't respond to a single one. His gaze remained fixed on me, his throat moving as he swallowed. I sat slumped against the edge of the bed, my voice worn thin from hours of soothing him. Barely able to speak at all, I simply said 2 words. "Leave." He didn't move. After a long silence, he finally spoke in a hoarse whisper, gently taking my hand, his fingers trembling. "Your phone received a message from the Marriage Oversight Board, reminding you that if you don't withdraw your application within 3 days, the divorce will be officially processed." Mason held my hand lightly and asked, "Do you still want to end things with me?" I sat by the bedhead, giving a barely noticeable nod. "Why don't you want me?" Mason looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, appearing utterly helpless. "Why suddenly don't you want me anymore? The real reason we're breaking up is that you never truly loved me. Now you don't want me to leave only because you've grown used to having me around." I asked him, "Do you feel anything when you see me? Do you notice how anxious I get? Have you ever thought about being with me for the long term?" Mason looked at me in confusion, as if he couldn't understand why I'd ask such a thing, but he nodded firmly. I felt utterly lost. Didn't they say the main character didn't understand love before meeting you? He really doesn't know, does he? He's never actually said he loved the antagonist. He just didn't understand, not that he couldn't learn. "Aren't you annoyed that I keep watching over you?" I asked him, hesitating slightly. "No, I'm not annoyed by you keeping an eye on me," Mason quickly denied. "If I really were bothered, I'd have already broken things off with you. I wouldn't be doing exactly what you say. When you think about it, he claims to hate the side character, but every time that person asks him to do something, he does it without hesitation." I paused for a moment. Maybe that was true. But what about that Omega? I happened to save him once at a bar, when you suddenly stopped paying attention to me. I wanted to make some desserts you'd like as an apology. He worked at the bakery where I went, so we ended up meeting again, Mason said quietly, glancing at me carefully. The bar owner told me he was good with relationships, so I asked him. He said maybe you're pulling away because you've grown tired of me. If I make you feel jealous, it might spark your interest again and keep you from leaving. The chat was flooded with question marks and exclamation points. "So that's how it is." Huh, I stretched out the words. "Wait, don't tell me you're actually going to forgive him? Even if we misled you, does that mean he's not at fault?" I reached out and lifted his chin gently. "Do you hate me?" Mason shook his head violently. "Then do you like me?" Mason nodded obediently on my hand, looking at me with hopeful eyes. "But you've made me really unhappy," I said. "So I won't be canceling the divorce." Mason looked as if all his color had drained away, gripping my hand tightly. "But once I'm single again, you can try chasing me," I said slowly. "Show me you're capable of doing better. Okay?" I gave his face a light tap. Mason quickly nodded, afraid I might change my mind any second. I later realized Mason's difficulty with affection was closely tied to the absence of his parents during his first 20 years and his grandfather's strictness. He learned how to care for someone in a clumsy way, slowly picking it up from me. I sometimes found myself missing that earlier time when he didn't understand love. Back then, he wasn't so demanding. After learning about it, Mason even started feeling jealous over himself in the past. That was a little overwhelming to deal with. I ended up promising him I'd always love the version of me he has now, this one, right here with him in this moment.